Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wretched pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking before you give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands, mold it into the shape of your most private needs, sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear or yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering us space to place new steps of change here on the pulse of this new day. May you have the courage to look up and out and upon the rock, the river, the tree, your country here on the pulse of this fine day. May you have the grace to look into your sister's eyes, to look upon your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. To you all, I say good afternoon or good evening, whenever you may be watching this. It's so good to be with you all. My name is Dr. Wilson Okello. Again, just grateful for the opportunity to join you, to be one of the voices that gets to welcome you to FIT in the new academic year. As I get started, I would begin with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement of recognition as we pay respect for to the indigenous peoples and nations that are connected to traditional territories. It's a sign of respect, right? And gratitude for those individuals, for those generations, for those communities that occupy the territory and the land that we reside in. It's important that we understand that there's a long history of land, regardless of where we go, right? And the history of settler colonialism. We know that colonialism is an ongoing project, and it's an ongoing process in this nation, and we must be mindful, right, of its practices and the ways that it works such that we can begin to decolonize the lands, right, our education and really our minds. And so I want to acknowledge and offer deep gratitude to the Lenape land and the water that supports us as we're gathered here right now together. I invite you to join me as we pay respect and give gratitude to the Lenape people and the Lenape land. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. If we get to take just a moment of silence. Thank you for joining me in that. I'd like to begin with that meditation from our dear sister, Maya Angelou, as a way to remind us that every dream really has a starting place, right? The dream that Angelou projected onto the country in 1992 was a long cultural dream that predated her. Among the many things I appreciate about poets and literary minds is their ability to chronicle the times, to present us with rich archives so that the patterns of our present and future need not be out of touch with our history. She reminds us that we all have a commitment to those who are coming after us, and in the spirit of paying it forward, I come to you today and I think about the work that we are preparing to do. To be honest, I'm heavy in this moment. I'm deeply saddened by the state of affairs that we've been in for the past couple of months and really years and really generations, if we want to sort of think more broadly. I can't approach this conversation as if it were a normal set of circumstances, because as we all know, it isn't. As a matter of fact, the idea of normal rings artificial, right? It's non-descriptive in many ways as a frame, right, for the familiar, right, and a justified state of affairs that has always worked for some and has never worked for most. This is not normal. Indeed, many of us have never lived under the umbrella of normal. We are seated in the catastrophe, right, of a triple pandemic, right? We have the public health crisis, certainly of COVID-19. We have this generational public health crisis that is the manifestation of racism 1619. And then we have this economic pandemic that is affecting communities across this nation, right? And really the world. My heart is broken literally over the almost 167,000 lives that have been taken from COVID, right? This is not an abstract sort of contraction that we are wrestling with. We have lost 167,000 people. 167,000 people are dead. Many of us know people or know people who have lost loved ones due to this pandemic. I'm saddened by the Black and Indigenous people of color that are being disproportionately exposed and dying from COVID. We know that over 30,000 Black people have died from COVID. We can let all of that sink in. 167,000 people just in this nation, 30,000 Black people. And if we think about Indigenous lives, they are continuing again to lose lives at resounding rates. People of color connected to, again, generations of disproportionality in their communities are being affected in these really nuanced ways. This all in the midst of a public reckoning, right? Over an unresolved history that has taken many countless lives, right? What becomes our work in this moment? What becomes the thing that we are supposed to take up? It seems like every August, right, I approach students and greet many students just like yourselves, and I'm attempting to come up with new words for the same type of pain, trying to make sense of really what has become unspeakable, to give voice to the dead and to the dying, right? I'm tired in many ways of burying Black people. I mean that both in a literal and a figurative sense. The death of George Floyd will certainly, right, be marked as a crucible moment in this fight for Black mattering. Certainly it has galvanized people in really nuanced ways. But as I think about it, I can't help but question or ask, what is different about this particular set of circumstances that has pushed so many of our brothers and sisters, particularly our white brothers and sisters, to respond in these new and different ways, right? What was different about this virtual and this visceral scene that compelled individuals to respond in a certain type of way? I want to suggest to you all that our Black living, if we're going to advocate for lives mattering, that they cannot be catalyzed by the notion of death, right? Let me say it this way. Black death or individuals dying can't be the reasons that we take to the street, right? Now, it can't be the reasons that we all of a sudden feel compelled to stand up and to begin to advocate differently for those who are being disproportionately affected. I'm excited though, right, in this moment, right, in this despair, I'm excited, right, about some of the shifts that are happening, right? I'm excited about the name changes. I'm excited to see some of the long labor, right, finally come to fruition, but we need not be flattered, right, by the proliferation of statements and name changes, because in and of themselves, that is not racial justice. Those things are not going to bring us towards equity when we can begin to march, right, for the living, when we can begin to write for the living, when we can begin to create and plan and lift up those who are living. That will move us closer to the project of justice, of racial justice, of decolonization, right? So to all the Black, Indigenous, people of color who are viewing this in this particular moment, I don't know you, but I see you, right? I love you. And I would encourage you, just as Toni Morrison has always encouraged me, by saying that here in this place, we have to love our flesh. Flesh that weeps and laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. We have to love it hard, because yonder, they don't love your flesh, they despise it. Yonder, they don't love your eyes, they just as soon pluck them out, no more than they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flayed. Oh, my people, she says, they don't love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, she says, love them, raise them up and kiss them, touch others with them, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. Love them, she says. Hold on to your heart, because this is the prize. Take care of yourselves. Right? Protect your spirit, protect your peace at all costs. So as you might gather, I've been reflecting quite a bit on the life and the legacy of Toni Morrison, and the corpus of her essays and stories. They are without a doubt cemented in the literary canon. I believe that we are all better because she was here. More than what she wrote, however, I'm drawn to the brilliance of Professor Morrison because of what was beneath her words. And Toni Morrison, she was not shy about telling anyone who would ask why she wrote what she wrote. She wasn't interested in those, or I should say, she was interested in those who were going to read her work. She was interested in a particular Black readership, right? The allegory or the parallel for Morrison was Black music, right? So Black music was as splendid, as wonderful, as complicated as it was, because the audience that she was after was from within. Its primary audience was within, right? Yes, music has become universal. Jazz, the blues, hip hop, R&B, all these things that we have sort of come to understand as genres for everyone, right? Everyone can play it, everyone can participate in it, but it evolved, right? Its primary audience originally was the Black community. She wanted her literature, right? The things that she wrote to operate in this type of way, right? To connect to the soil, right? There's an important lesson in this for each of us, and it's that that we need not apologize, right, for our work being deeply connected to the core of who we are. But in that, right, we assume a particular type of responsibility to complicate our work by both acknowledging and centering identity. I submit to you that in this nation, our collective futures suffer when we fail to examine how identity shapes the world and our work. When they treat identity like something that's transparent, like, right, something that we can't see, kind of like those fish, right, that David Foster Wallace writes about, right? There's two fish who are swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish who's coming their way. The older fish nods and says, "Good morning, how's the water?" The two fish kind of say hello and then swim away. All of a sudden, the two fish finally turn and look to each other and say, "What the hell is water?" Right, even if the work does not wear identity on its sleeve, I want to submit to you this morning that we are all continuously being shaped by the water. We are all continuously being shaped by this notion of identity. Our work to do in this world, whatever it is that you are embarking on, I believe is a form of creativity. And with that comes the power to oppress and to liberate, to scar and both to sanctify, to plunder and to redeem. Our creativity has a responsibility beyond us. Morrison, she tells the story of a Christmas day several years ago, and she was staring out the window, and she was in an extremely dark mood. She was feeling particularly helpless in this particular time. A friend, a fellow artist, called to wish happy holidays, and calls and says, "How are you?" And instead of you know how we do, and instead of just saying things were fine, she decides to blurt out the truth. She says, "I'm not well. I'm depressed. I can't seem to work. I can't seem to write. I'm paralyzed," right? And I've never sort of been in this type of situation before, right? All of these things that are going on in and around us. And just as she's about to explain and go into detail, the friend interrupts her and says, "No, no, no. See, this is the time when artists are to go to work, not when everything is fine, right? But when there is dread." See, Morrison, she reminds us that this moment that we're in, right, catalyzed by this triple pandemic, right, the despair that so many individuals are facing, this is not the time for pity. It's not the time for fear. We speak, we work, and we create, right? And this is how civilizations can heal, right? I know very much that the world is bruised. Right? I know that it is bleeding, and though it's important not to ignore the pain that we're feeling, it's also critical that we refuse to succumb to its hostility. Our work to do in this world is to imagine otherwise, is to imagine new possibilities for being. If we were to even look across time, we will see countless examples of individuals, right, who ordinary folks who became masters of the impossible in these moments of dread. We can look at Arkansas in 1957, and there we would find a teenage Elizabeth Eckford and 8 other students who known as the Little Rock Nine, as they crossed these red seas of vitriol on their way to integrating a central high school. We could look at Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1st, 1960, and there we would find 4 other teenagers, Ezell Blair, Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, and David Richmond, as they took a stand by taking a seat at Woolworth's lunch counter. And though they were tormented, they refused to leave. 3 days later, some 300 other students would join them to continue to protest. I will show you the Children's Crusade, right, in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, where thousands of children ages 8 to 17 were trained in these tactics of nonviolence. On the first day of protest, they were arrested. On the second day, they were beat with batons. They were sprayed with water hoses. They were threatened with police dogs, but they continued to show up. They continued to offer these demonstrations, right? And the footage and the photographs of that violence would go a long way in helping to turn the tide of what we know as that civil rights moment, right? I will show you East Los Angeles in 1968, where thousands of Chicano students went back and forth with the school district to address dropout rates and overcrowding, and these incompetent teachers and administrators, counselors who were steering these students into things like auto shop instead of college track courses, right? When the administration didn't respond, they staged a massive walkout, right? We could look at Tiananmen Square on June 5th, 1989, and we would find a lone unidentified person who stood in front of a column of tanks that were threatening to barrel them down. See, this was one day after thousands of people were slaughtered in Beijing. This was an act of defiance against overwhelming odds. We could look at the Arab Spring, right, in Northern Africa, in the Middle East in 2010, and we can see how one person's act of bravery in Tunisia set off pro-democratic uprisings in places like Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. We could look at North Dakota, right, in 2016, and we will see indigenous youth who organized a 2,000-mile spiritual run, right, from North Dakota to Washington, D.C. to protest the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? We could look at this very moment. There is something happening here. There's something happening on the streets of New York City, right? There were individuals, just like the folks I mentioned, right, are sensing that there is more to life than what has been carved out for them. And if we are to have more, we have to be willing to create it. These individuals were participating in the project of world making, right? World making. They were imagining otherwise. I told you, I started off by telling you that I was sad in this moment, that I've been heavy, and I'm constantly sort of wrestling with this sense of despair as individuals, the collective we, right, not everyone, but attempts to sort of move past this moment, right? And in some ways, I think we try to move through pain too quickly, right? I think there is a season of mourning, but I'm also motivated in this moment. I'm thinking about a video, Flying Lotuses, Never Gonna Catch Me. If you get a chance, go ahead and watch that. But in this particular video, I'm reminded that both mourning and the insistence on life can exist all at once. The video, it opens at a funeral. where two children, a black boy and a black girl, they're lying in this sort of open casket, and they're beautiful, right? The community is sort of grieving around them inconsolably. And the scene really is just sort of one of profound mourning. And then the children, they open their eyes. They climb out of their caskets, and they begin to sort of dance explosively in front of the church. Then they dance and run out of the church. The mourners obviously can't see this sort of resurrection, but the kids, they dance with creativity, with an expressiveness of life of that you know is born of violence and violation, right? It's the type of expression that has literally turned the world right upside down. I believe that we have a generational type of work to do in this moment. We have an explosive type of creating to do in this particular moment, and you all get to lead it. So my question for you all as you embark on this new experiences, this set of years that you will be at FIT, is what is your work to do? Right? And it's all right. It's all right if you don't know. It's a big question, but I believe that as we start thinking about it, right, we'll reach points of clarification, right? Again, it's not. It's okay not to know, but I would encourage you to think about what brings you to this particular moment. Why are you here, and what will it mean, right, that you were here? What will it mean that you were here? Right? As we think about where we might begin in this moment to begin to answer these questions, I'm thinking about Martin King's 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, when we're reminded that we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. And we are confronted with the fierce urgency of now in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, as King says. There is a such thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Over the bleached bones and the jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are the pathetic words, too late. There is an invisible book that faithfully records our vigilance or neglect. We still have today, my friends. We still have an election coming. We still have your life. We still have your creativity. You still have time. What will it mean that you were here? You all get to decide what type of leaders you're going to be. You get to set the tone for what society and culture ought to be doing from this moment on. As we grapple with society's hardest questions, right, as we think about our responsibility, you all have the potential stored up in you to begin to respond to this moment. I think about the prophets in ancient Hebrew culture. The prophets were the ones who were responsible for keeping the ministry of imagination alive, right? It was the prophets that individuals looked to evoke a consciousness that could serve as the alternative to the dominant culture that was around them. It was a prophet that was responsible for inserting moral language into public dialogue and making hope accessible and materializing the possibility of different sorts of outcomes, right? We see this in a Martin King, who would often say, I see the power of God, right? Transforming the fatigue of despair into the buoyancy of hope. I am convinced that in the struggle for righteousness, the universe continually bends towards justice. The brilliance of a king was in his ability to creatively recast a familiar dream, right, for a particular time and a purpose. But and I believe that when you dream out loud, right, you stumble across, upon a place like FIT, and I believe that you find other dreamers who will want to leave their mark on society, right? Dreamers don't do this in isolation. Who would a Martin King be without a Martin King Sr., right? His father and a minister himself. Who would a Martin King be without an Alberta Christine Williams King, his mother? who was a minister in her own right and an organist, right? Who would a Martin King be without an Ella Jo Baker and her democratic philosophies of leadership? Who would a Martin King be without a Mahalia Jackson, who quite literally compelled dreams to come out into the open? Who would a Martin King be without individuals like Ida B. Wells, right, in her prophetic fire, right? Edwidge Endicott. In her book, Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work, reminds us that we should imagine otherwise, more than just for sort of pomp and circumstance, but for the purpose of creating anew the world that we so desperately want. The process of creating art that tells the truth, she says, requires courage, it requires faith, it requires honesty, and an understanding of the greater good. As the individual she talks about often risked everything up to and including their lives so that we might have the opportunity to remember who we are as people. It is because of their decisions to create what was necessary for our survival that we have an opportunity to do the same for others. And so a message for you is to create dangerously. Create dangerously, right? For those who are pursuing, right, these courageous matters, knowing in part that no matter how trivial your work, right, may some days seem that someone, someday, somewhere is depending on your work for survival. I would encourage you to create dangerously, as though each piece of art, each thing you put your hands to, right, were standing for life, for a soul, for a future. I believe that we have no other choice. As I considered this own question, I wrote the following piece. The walls of my bedroom were my first easel. Sandstone espresso, the color of less dangerous coffee. Neutral and watered down like the backdrop for photographs, a surface with no distinction, would never have a story to tell. My brother and I, we couldn't bear the agony of untold adventures. So when life was only as tall as doorknobs, we left all the wisdom we could squeeze out of Crayola in hieroglyphics for archaeologists to examine. Mama didn't like this too much. Said this wasn't the place for that type of intellect. There would come a time when maturity will compel us to restore and revitalize the incivility of radical imagination. But I would never forget my father's words at the hearing of our mischievous acts. He said, if this is how they want to live, then let them do it. Perhaps he saw something in us that was buried in him, the same courage that allowed him to break the ocean in two and carry the weight of never returning. Ideas don't fit into rigid boundaries. Immigrants rarely do, so they raise poets to be the pencil for the silenced and paint on walls because there was never room for them in books to become authors for the purpose of naming the murals we dismiss as graffiti, the genre of the voiceless if riots or the language of the unheard. The bricks of my spirit are full of them. Cacophony and three-part harmony crosses. I didn't choose to bear, but for the sake of this gospel, I wear our bodies, our projects, portraits, rehearsing the struggle for justice, noisy, disruptive, unruly, contentious adjectives we assign to things that misbehave, suspending the humanity of things that offend. This is what it looks like to be a problem. This is what it sounds like to be a problem. Art was never meant to hang in galleries. Flawed templates for cursory viewing, musing, and mindless movements along a carousel of controlled protest masterpieces lose their brilliance this way, this posturing, this turning down your rage to barely audible levels so that they will never hear the fireworks in your belly, the language of pain, anger, and love. Our canvas isn't polite, it's political. Spilled acrylic paint in all the right places, part dialogue and revolution, rarely separating the two. Keep showing up, and when you do, show up big and loud, out of place and eloquent like fevers that won't break. Soup and water won't rid this type of disease. Custodians can't scrub out what is weather resistant. Resting in the bosom of aerosols, the permission to scribble interruptions into advocacy, truancy into truth-telling, vandalism into validation. You could spend a lifetime responding to the symbols into the shapes given to you, or you can give them something to call you. Make sure your mural is incandescent and glows in the dark. Say of the same materials as brown girls dreaming, and the souls of black folk. Name it something powerful, something soulful and urgent, convicting the tongue with every syllable too complicated to utter thoughtlessly. Train them to say it correctly and repeat if necessary. You are worthy of that. Name is something defiant. Rebellions and protests share the same soul, no matter what nation or state you call home. Give it a holy name. Our children will hear the voices we give to our prayers and remember to be proud of their bodies and this genius, no matter how wrong they are told they are. Make it sound like hip hop. Literacy of recovery, rebirth with a soundtrack of resistance written on vinyl, arresting a world that co-opted your rhythm and blues. Return to our possession and license to move freely. Call it Umoja, Ujima, Ujamani Akumba, and every principle that reaffirms the beauty from which we ascend. Name it Jericho or Berlin, with your voice as the trumpet and arms raised like trombones. Yes, walls may be insurmountable, but nothing is impenetrable. Unrighteous cornerstones will always fall in on themselves. Give it a fearless tone, one of warriors and war cries. Make it a resurrection song for the names we will pull from the wreckage of oppression that will not stay nameless. Trayvon, Tamir, Eric, Sean, Rakaya, Yvette, Cynthia, Denise, Brianna, Sandra. Your names, your memory will be the rhythm in my breath. It will be the paint on my hands. Our lives are murals with no name until we give it one. As we begin to sort of take up this work of creativity, I want to offer you 4 questions to reflect on. If we're going to take up our responsibility, take up what it means to be leaders in this moment, to exercise our creativity, to imagine otherwise, I believe that we will need to be responsive to 4 fundamental questions. Those questions: number 1, what is it that you want? Number 2, how are you positioned? Number 3, what power do you have? And number 4, what are you willing to give up? Number 1, what is it that you want? Number 2, what power do you have? Number 3, how are you positioned? And number 4, what are you willing to give up? If we could, let's take the first question, this first question of what do I want? In other words, what do you want your words, your thoughts, your very presence to accomplish in this world? Nothing, I believe, will threaten the actualization of your purpose, right, than the seduction to be less than you are capable of being, to be mediocre, right? I ask myself this question, right, what do I want, right, partially as a responsibility to you, but also as I think about my work in the world, my work in the classroom, my work on campus, my work in organizations, right? How do we honor the gifts that we've been given? And I believe that as we begin to sort of respond to these questions, is we get clarity around what it is that we desire for our work, right? Our thoughts, our presence to accomplish in this world. For me, I want my words, my thoughts, my presence to do 3 fundamental things. I want to create, I want to inspire, and I want to disrupt. I want to create, I want to inspire, and I want to disrupt. What is it that you want your words, your thoughts, your creativity, right? Your ideas, your very presence, right? To accomplish. I would invite you to think about 3 words that come to mind when I ask you this particular question, right? We've seen writers who are able to tangle things like mythology or ideas like mythology, futurism, dystopia, science fiction, to blend them together in new and imaginative ways. We've seen creatives push genre and conventionality, right, in imaginative ways in this particular moment, right? What is it that you want your work to do? Number 1. What do you want? Number 2, how are you positioned? I believe that the most radical thing that we will ever do in this world is to define who we are against a world that has already determined what we will be. The most radical thing that we will ever do in this world is to define who you are, to define yourself in a world that has already determined who you are and what you will be. I'm thinking about Ta-Nehisi Coates' recent book, or a few years back, Between the World and Me. He offers a stark contrast between what he believes America, or what America believes it has achieved, and the experiences of people who live outside of what he calls the dream. In detailing his own narrative, a conversation he had with his son, he writes about the night that the St. Louis prosecutor, or St. Louis grand jury, handed down this decision of a non-indictment. This is in the case where Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown. In this particular incident, Coates and his son, they were watching television, and they were watching the decision being made. And once the decision was made, Coates' son, he ran off to his bedroom crying. After several minutes, Ta-Nehisi Coates goes in to check on his son, and he writes the following. He says, "I didn't hug you. I didn't comfort you. I didn't tell you it was going to be okay, because I never believed it was going to be okay. What I told you is what your grandparents tried to tell me, and that is this, that this is your world. This is your body. This is your country. And you have to figure out how to live within all of that." The question of how does one live in this body, in this Black body for Coates, inside a country that is lost in the dream, has been the question of my life. I believe that this is a profound question that we all need to wrestle with, right? Black, brown, indigenous, people of color, or otherwise, because as we get closer to understanding how we're positioned, it informs how we might respond in the world. There's this idea called the cycle of socialization. It says that once we're born, we're bombarded with messages from various ideological places, right? Our family, our churches, our schools, the media. These things all serve to inform how we think about ourselves, how we think about the world, and how we think about ourselves in the world. How does, right, one live in the body that you hold, right, within this country? I believe, again, it's a profound question as we begin to sort of think about our own social identities, our membership when we consider our race, our gender, our class, our sexuality, our ability, right? All these things serve to inform how we are acted upon in the world and how we move in and through the world. Any serious conversation about owning our responsibility in this moment must begin with a question of how we understand ourselves in the world, right? One of my favorite poets, Audre Lorde, would say it this way, that we need to learn to hold on to all of the pieces of us that serve us, despite the pressure we are no doubt going to face to live some pieces of us and erase others. We need to learn to hold on to all of the pieces of us that serve us, despite the pressure we are no doubt going to face to live some pieces of us and to erase others. I'll give you one example of a student who did this very thing as she was responding to this moment. I'll read you an email that I received from this student probably a few weeks back now in response to this particular moment. It says, "Hi, Dr. Okello. In light of current protests and movements going on in the country, I want to make sure I do the right thing and I take a stand for equality. I want to ensure that I do this in a correct manner in order to prevent offending anyone, but I also want to do something to help and not remain silent. I know I will never understand what it is like to be Black, and I know that your class taught me so much about how to process. I don't think I realized how naive I was on the matter of race and inequality in our country. I guess the overall purpose of me writing this email is to first check in on you and to let you know how much I value your opinion, and secondly, to ask for your guidance and how I can educate myself more and in turn educate those around me on the best way to support the cause. I've seen lots of posts on social media, but I know that those have a limited effect if we do not put our words into action. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you are staying healthy and well. Sincerely, this particular student. This student was a white student, a white woman, And what I appreciate most about this particular email is that she was willing to sort of own her positionality, right? To own where she was, own her identities in the moment. I think it's important, right? As I offer sort of advice to her, but also as I'm thinking about words I might share with you, I think it's important that we do our own self-work, right? And exploring our own relationship to this idea, this large idea of whiteness and white privilege, of dominance and systems of oppression. These ideas require work. Before we can actually begin to address what this means in public, we have to be willing to sort of to do the work on our own, right? To address this in our own, in our lives. I would also encourage you to invest in the idea of building community, right? I think whiteness as an idea trains us, right? Whiteness as a system of domination, white supremacy, more broadly, it trains us to skip the process, right, of community building and go straight to outcomes, right? So everybody wants to do something in this moment, but we forget about what it means to build community, right? So build community with others, right? It allows you to support one another, right? To hold each other accountable in this moment. If we go into this knowing that we're all committed to a common purpose, it changes, right, the particular outcome, right? I want you to think about your community even right now, right? Who in your community can push you to be better? For some of you, that might be an easy question to answer. For others, you might have to think. You might have to think a little bit. But I would encourage you to think about who in your community can push you to be better, right? I believe that in this work, right, of self-exploration, of pushing towards racial justice, of pushing towards decolonization, of pushing, right, towards this idea of social justice, right, that you're going to be met with some resistance, right? Both externally, but also I think internally, right? And I think it can be a liberatory journey, but it's going to require motivation, right? You need to sort of lean in when it gets difficult and important. To quote Jamie Washington, resistance, I believe, and as Dr. Washington, Reverend Dr. Washington might say, resistance is just a sign that you're in the right place, right? And so I would encourage you to think about what it means to do self-work, to invest in community, and to remain motivated toward this idea of equity, of social justice, of racial justice and decolonization, right? How are you positioned? This third question, right? What power do you have? Alice Walker reminds us that the most common way that we give up our power is by thinking that we don't have any, right? So power is simply the ability to shape reality or to give meaning to it. I believe it's something that we all possess, irrespective of the energy we might spend contending that we're powerless, right? I believe that we can be curators and arbiters of knowledge, and where we can do that, I believe that we always will always have some form of power. Malcolm X would say it this way, that the most critical thing facing people in the Americas, oppressed or otherwise, is a lack of a radical imagination. It says that we have sentenced ourselves to a way of thinking and strategizing that is either accepted, advised, or approved. Said in another way, we've given in to what some scholars might call a false consciousness, or we believe only in things that seem attainable or within reason. And this false consciousness, it severely impedes our ability, our capacity to move through the world with any sort of authority, because we're always seeking the go-ahead. We're always seeking affirmation. We're always seeking the validation to do the things I believe that we are capable of doing. When we take our power and we fuse it with our agency, I believe that we can do the extraordinary. What power do you have? Right. And I believe that as we, again, take that up, we can do amazing things in this world. I believe that creativity in many ways, right, it emerges in responses to the things that plague our communities, right? And so I'm interested in your creative emergences, right? The things that are pushing you in this particular moment. We're seeing so many artists, so many visual artists, right, who are who are taking this moment and responding in powerful ways. Think about Henry Taylor and Michael Rakowitz of Jatovia, Gary of Carrie Mae Weems, of Alexandra Bell, and the just broadly Black women in the in the Black Lives Matter movement. I think about individuals, right, who are turning boulevards and streets, right, into to Black Lives Matter boulevards, right, across the nation, right? What type of, how are you taking up your power, right, infusing it with your agency? What power do you have in this moment, and how are you taking that up? What do you want? How are you positioned? What power do you have? And finally, what are you willing to give up? And this will be my sort of final point. But what are you willing to give up? Again, if we were to canvas history, we will see countless examples of individuals at these points of departure, right? These critical moments in their life and destiny where they made these unpopular decisions, speak truth to power. And so I'm asking you, what are you willing to give up? Truth to power, and the notion of truth to power, I think in many ways has become romanticized. I think that we forget that speaking truth to power doesn't come from surplus, right? It doesn't come from the things that we already have and we can just kind of skim some off the top and give away. But truth to power, speaking truth to power, it comes from sacrifice. So what are you willing to sacrifice, to get out of, right? To give up, to relinquish, such that we can move forward in a different type of way. I think about Nina Simone. The sultry singer, right, from North Carolina, right? She dreamed of being this classical pianist, right? Her work coalesced with her unique gifting. It would catapult her into the hearts, into the ears of music enthusiasts, right? She was known for her rich, her earthy, and her deeply personal arrangements. Simone could take a piece of music and morph it into experience. Those around her said that she had a particular gift, right? She could hear things and literally morph it into an experience. But when we think about Simone, those around her said that she became disillusioned, right, by the hollowness of all of the praise and the bright lights as she wrestled with anger concerning the condition of minoritized folks in the sort of Western United States. Lucidly and passionately, she proclaimed once that freedom is no fear. I mean, really no fear. If I could but live half my life. Those around her, again, would say that Simone would become difficult to book, right, for shows, for gigs, for opportunities, because she would not stop speaking out. What do you want? How are you positioned? What power do you have? What are you willing to give up? I think about the 1968 Olympics. Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Peter Norman, they became these symbols of political struggle and this portrait of open defiance. I'm sure you know the story. Right after finishing first, second, and third in a 200-meter dash, Smith, the athletes, all of them, did the unimaginable on the medal stand during the national anthem. Smith, with a black glove on his right hand, he raised his fist to the sky. Carlos, with a black glove on his left hand, he raised his fist to the sky, symbolizing this sort of arc of unity. These two black athletes wore black socks to symbolize poverty in a racist America. Peter Norman, the white athlete, he wore the Olympic badge of human rights on his jacket, and he stood in solidarity with these two athletes. Now, all of the athletes, all three athletes would sort of face immediate pushback. Smith and Carlos most immediately were suspended from the team. They were expelled from Olympic Village, and they were sent home as an embarrassment to their country. For the rest of their lives, all three athletes would occupy this precarious place of individuals who could have had it all, right? All the medals, the glory, the riches, records, but they opted for these borderlands of sorts, right? According to Smith and Carlos, how could we be celebrated on this podium when at home our people continue to suffer? What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to sort of relinquish? What are you willing to give up? As I think about our obligation in this particular moment, I think the obligation for all of us, anyone who thinks of themselves as responsible, is to examine society, right? To try to change it, and no matter the cost, right? For me, I remain unapologetic in my agenda to enliven warriors whose words, whose actions will land on the side of justice and integrity. And I believe that we're all granted a particular platform to do this type of work. As we answer and we reflect on these questions of what do you want, how are you positioned, what power do you have, and what are you willing to give up? I hope that it will move you closer to enacting your creativity in brilliant and nuanced ways. I'm excited for the work that you all are taking up. I'm excited for your journey over the next few years. What will it mean that you all were here in this particular moment? FIT, thank you all so much for the opportunity again to join you. Thank you all so much to your planning, your staff, your phenomenal staff, all of the organizers for the invitation to join you. I continue to appreciate the long partnership and love that we share. And so if I can be a resource for any of you students, staff, faculty, I'm certainly willing to do so. So all the best as we move forward with courage and with integrity and with a different resolve in this particular moment. I pray that you all are safe and that you all are well, and take good care as you move into a phenomenal fall. Thank you all so much for having me.